changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. It's Friend Friday, and today I'm going to chat with Lee Woodruff, the forward writer for two of our books. Lee is the co-author of the New York Times bestselling book, In an Instant. I've read it. It's a fascinating book. It really helps to educate people about traumatic brain injuries, which are a serious problem for our returning service members, as well as the millions of people in the civilian population who suffer TBIs every year. And Lee wrote the foreword for our book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Recovering from Traumatic Brain Injuries. And Bob Woodruff's traumatic brain injury is what led Lee and her husband to found the Bob Woodruff Foundation to assist post-9/11 injured service members, veterans, and their families to heal from the physical and the silent wounds of war. And Lee and I today are talking about a new book for which she wrote the foreword, Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Spirit of America. And that book is helping the Bob Woodruff Foundation. We're making a donation to the foundation for each copy that we sell. And so we're going to talk about that today because it's a wonderful book filled with stories about veterans, about active service members, about military families, about 9/11 and its impact on us still today, 15 years later. So Lee, welcome to the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast, again for the second time in a couple of months.
I love it. It feels like home. Thanks for having me.
Sure. And you know what was so interesting is when I asked you to write the foreword for us and I did that call out for stories for the book, I didn't really know what we were going to get. And what was amazing was the hundreds, maybe thousands of stories we received about military families, active service members, veterans, and 9/11, and the open wound that we still have from 9/11. And in fact, in your foreword, you started off your foreword writing about coming home to the U.S. from London after 9/11 and what that felt like. So I thought maybe we could start talking about that.
Absolutely. I was, first of all, so honored when you asked, because the first thing I think of when I think about, America and the fabric of America really are our troops, and certainly largely because of our work with the Bob Woodruff Foundation. But everybody has that moment with September 11th, like earlier generations did with Kennedy or Martin Luther King. And for me, for September 11th, certainly I can go through all the events of where I was when I heard the news, but we were expats in London. So almost more incredible to me, or heartwarming, or all of the, so many emotions that are hard to articulate, was landing whenever it was, how many months after the event in this country, and just seeing the outpouring of support and love and all the flags. And so that's how that forward started for me, because it's hard to extricate the symbol of America, our flag, from, so many emotions that we all associate with being proud to be an American.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We got a lot of stories about the flag, and it's not just a piece of fabric. The flag really does have so much meaning for us, and I really paid attention to Flag Day this year, and it was a holiday. It was a holiday I never had thought about before, and I barely knew that it existed. And this year, I really noticed Flag Day and Armed Forces Day and all these different patriotic days that we have in May and June. And I did hear that American flag sales are up 15% this year, and I've noticed all the consumer products that are coming out now in red, white, and blue, and guys are wearing, bathing suits that are American flag motif, boxer shorts that have American flags on them. Everybody's going crazy right now, wearing red, white, and blue, and wearing things that are embellished with American flags or with stars and stripes.
Is this about the election year? What do you think this is? What's driving this right now?
I don't know. I mean, when I decided to make this book about the spirit of America, it was probably a year and a half ago. And so I didn't know that this election would become something that people were so passionate about, no matter which side they're on. Besides an election year, it is also the 15th anniversary year of 9/11. But maybe it's just something in the mood of the country that even without an election, we're all just a lot more conscious now of being Americans. We're always feeling like we're under attack. Maybe we're defending ourselves more, defending our country that we love.
Right. And it's sort of a uniform in a sense that says I'm an American.
Yeah, and it's something to be proud of, not something to hide. I think way, way back, like when I was in high school during the Vietnam War, people were a little bit ashamed of being Americans. And now I think that people aren't. They're proud now to be Americans, and they are wearing the red, white, and blue proudly.
I think you're right. I really do. And I think it's a moment just like September 11th was a moment that coalesced everybody together, no matter what your belief or religion. Hopefully as a country, we will be able to get there again without the tragedy.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like now is the fact that I see such a contrast now in how we treat our military versus the way the military was viewed when I was a teenager. I still don't really understand how back then during the Vietnam War, when we had guys who were drafted, who didn't even ask to go overseas and fight, we vilified them when they came home. And now we have an all-volunteer army, and we laud them when they come home. I don't understand how we were ever vilifying the soldiers back then, but it sure is wonderful to see the soldiers treated properly now with respect and with thankfulness.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's so much layered into history about the Vietnam War. So much had changed from the Greatest Generation to that war. But I think that part of what you and I loved in some of the stories about the military in the book were those moments of coming home. I mean, as you said, the stories ranged all over the boards for the ones discussing the military, and I love them all. But some of the ones about the homecoming were just incredible to me. And that, you're right, our Vietnam veterans did not receive that kind of support and love.
No, they didn't. And it was interesting to see how many stories we had from people who said, I sat next to somebody wearing her uniform on a plane, and I wrote her a thank you note and slipped it into her hand. And then she read it and burst into tears. But like just members of the public reaching out to members of the military or to veterans and thanking them. Perfect strangers thanking other perfect strangers for current or past service. It was really heartwarming to read those stories over and over again in our book.
And then I loved the one, you and I talked about it, with the Vietnam veteran, the image of the Vietnam vet who had never been thanked. And there was an intersection in a moment where he finally got his thanks, however many years later. And I thought that was also a beautiful story.
Yeah, we had the person who had the high school reunion and thanked all the Vietnam vets who were there, and there were many. And how about the one that they were at, I think, Gettysburg, and there was a
very bedraggled.
Yeah, he looked like a homeless man, but he was wearing the Medal of Honor, and this general saw him and snapped to attention and saluted him. And it was such a shock to the woman who was watching, who was kind of a tour guide, I guess.
He was a tour guide, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and this homeless-looking man received the proper respect from the general. Well, I went through and I counted. This was so interesting to me because we really don't go into making these books with any preconceived notion about the subject matter. We let the thousands of stories that come in tell us what we should be reflecting back to society, what society is interested in. So I went through and I counted up the number of stories about specific topics. So in this Chicken Soup for the Soul, the Spirit of America book with 101 stories, we have 24 stories about active military service members or their families. We have 12 stories about veterans, and we have 14 stories about 9/11. So that's a total of 50 stories. Half the book is about military, veterans, or 9/11.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
It just shows where people's heads are right now. This is what is really important to people. And what struck me also with those 9/11 stories was how raw the wounds still are, how people are passionately describing how they felt on 9/11 15 years later and describing it with the same passion, horror, and hurt as if it had just happened.
Absolutely. I mean, the enormity of that attack on our soil, for so many people who had not been alive for Pearl Harbor, that was their Pearl Harbor. And you and I talked about that. I think that's in the introduction.
So you said something really cool in your foreword. I loved this. You said pride and patriotism in our country is a little bit like a pilot light in a stove. It's always on, ever ready, but sometimes it needs a spark to make it catch and flare. And then you said our book was the match that will help people reignite their passion for our nation. I loved that. And it made me think that this is the kind of book that people should be sharing with teenagers, that it would be wonderful for them.
There's so much cynicism, I think, now in our country, and it's so easy to not understand the struggles that have gone into so many rights that we take for granted, let alone the young men and women who are serving and going into the crucible overseas when their country asks. And so I think everybody needs a refresher course, just like anything, just like your husband. You take for granted every day. And then something wonderful happens, or something happens to a friend, not such a good thing, an illness or an injury, and then you just kind of take stock again. And I think the beautiful thing that you've curated in this book is that ability to sort of step back and go, wow, we really do live in a great country. And sure, there are issues. There's always going to be an issue. We have millions and millions of people, and part of the beauty of our democracy is it's a multi-layered quilt of different beliefs and genders and, races, and that's the greatest thing about this country. So it doesn't mean that everybody's always going to feel like we get along, but we sure as heck are giving it the best shot of any other country on this planet. And I think of course you forget that day to day. You worry about your bills or your child's grades or whatever it might be. And this Chicken Soup for the Soul book about America is, to me, a chance to step back and say, okay, you know what? I complain an awful lot about things day to day, but we are so lucky.
We are, and we have about 10 stories in there from immigrants who have become citizens who talk about how this is the dream for them. And most of us, we were born here and we just automatically got to be citizens, and we are very fortunate for that.
But we don't think about it. And it's interesting, Bob and I started our marriage in China in 88, so it was still very communist. And I came back from that experience watching people who had no say in what their jobs would be or how much they would make or how hard they worked. And I said to myself, I will vote in every single election that I possibly can. And I'm not sure I've missed one. It's so easy as an American to sort of say, I'm going to be somewhere else that day. I'll let this one go. But that experience of being somewhere that wasn't America and seeing what life would be like really galvanized for me that we cannot take these rights for granted at all.
That's right. And it is true. I don't think I've ever missed an election, not even, the little local election for the first selectman of the town.
Those are more important in some ways.
Yeah, I always vote or I get an absentee ballot. Mm-hmm. And I think that this book does remind us all how lucky we are to live here. I wrote a story in the book about how every single day when I get in the shower, I think about how lucky I am to have electricity and ample hot water and my beautiful bathroom and then a car to get in to drive to work, because I think about traveling in all the different third world countries that I've been in and how people there walk miles to go to school or carry water for half a mile back to their homes, and how easy it is for us.
No, that's so important. And again, as human beings on this planet, we can't think about that every single day. But I almost feel like this, as you said, this book is a wonderful way to remind our teenagers or our young adults, whether it's a gift or give it to somebody for the 4th of July, just a reminder, hey, we're lucky. So the little things that we moan about, let's stop moaning about them.
Yeah, I think the key about Chicken Soup for the Soul, the Spirit of America, is that it talks about the fact that America is already great. Of course, there's room for improvement, but it's a wonderful, great country already. And the book really points out what unites us, not what divides us.
And celebrates that. And we need to celebrate these days, don't we?
And I'm really proud that we're going to be able to give a contribution to your foundation, the Bob Woodruff Foundation, for every copy that we sell, and help to contribute to those long-lasting positive outcomes for today's veterans and their families. And by the way, to everybody listening, you can visit bobwoodrufffoundation.org to learn more about it. And you can find out more about Lee at leewoodruff.com. And Lee, I want to thank you for the work that you do, for the foreword that you wrote, for this conversation today. I'm Amy Newmark. Thank you for listening today. Next time we get together, I'm going to tell you about a guy whose whole life changed when he failed to ask a girl on a date and then figured out why. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for having me on.